Villisca is a small town in southwestern Iowa about an hour southwest of Des Moines. In 1912 the town was home to 2,039 people and was about 2 square miles in size. However, a house in Villisca would become the location of one of the most brutal mass murders in the history of the United States.
In the early morning hours of the 11th of June, 1912, 8 people were bludgeoned to death inside the home of the Moore family.
This included all 6 family members and 2 friends of one of the daughters. 6 of the victims were children. The victims included Josiah Moore, his wife Sarah Montgomery, and their 4 children, Herman, Mary, Boyd, and Paul. On the night of murders, the Moore family spent the evening at the Presbyterian church where they took part in the Children's Day program. Mary, who was 10 years old, invited 2 friends, sisters Ina May and Lena Gertrude Stillinger, to stay over for the night. That evening, no disturbances were reported coming from the Moore house. However, the next morning, neighbor Mary Peckham noticed the family did not come outside to do any of their usual chores. Mary knocked on the door of the house, but nobody answered. She then contacted Ross Moore, Josiah's brother. Ross Moore also got no answer when knocking the door, so he let himself in using his own key. While Peckham stood on the porch, Moore went into the parlor and opened the guest bedroom door. Inside he found Ina and Lena Stillinger's lifeless bodies on the bed. Moore and Peckham contacted Peace Officer Hank Horton, who arrived shortly after. The officer's search of the house revealed all 6 members of the Moore family, and the 2 Stillinger girls had been murdered, all of whom were bludgeoned to death using Josiah's own axe. The axe was left behind in the room with the Stillinger sisters. Doctors concluded that the murders took place between midnight and 5 a.m. 2 cigarettes found in the attic suggested the killer waited in the attic for the family to come home and go to sleep. The killer began in the master bedroom, where Josiah and Sarah Moore were sleeping. Josiah received more blows from the axe than any other victim. His face had been cut to such an extent that both of his eyes were missing. While the blade of the axe was used on Josiah, the rest of the victims were killed using the blunt end of the axe. After killing the parents, the killer proceeded into the children's rooms and bludgeoned Herman, Mary, Arthur, and Paul. The killer then returned to the master bedroom to inflict more blows on the parents Josiah and Sarah. The killer then moved downstairs to the guest bedroom, where they killed Ina and Lena. Investigators believe that all the victims except for Lena Stillinger had been asleep when murdered. They believe that she was awake and tried to fight back, as she was found with a defensive wound on her arm. Over time, many residents of Villisca were suspected in the murder of the Moore family and the 2 young Stillinger girls. However, it was Reverend Lynn George Kelly who police got closest to convicting for the Villisca Axe murders. Reverend Lynn George Kelly was an English-born traveling minister. He just so happened to be in the town on the night of the murders. Kelly was described as peculiar, reportedly having suffered a mental breakdown as an adolescent. As an adult, he was accused of being a peeping Tom and several times asking young women and girls to pose nude for him. He came to Villisca to teach at the Children's Day services, which the Moore family right before they were murdered. He left town just hours before the bodies were discovered. Reverend Kelly had confessed to the murders in court, but the jury did not believe his confession. 5 years later Kelly was arrested for the Villisca murders. Police obtained a confession from him, however, it followed many hours of questioning and Kelly later recanted. After 2 separate trials, he was acquitted, and the Villisca Axe murders remained unsolved. While Reverend Lynn George Kelly came closest to being convicted of the murders, there were plenty of other suspects. Frank Jones was an Iowa state senator and a prominent member of the town. Josiah Moore worked for Frank Jones at the Jones store for several years until he opened his own company in 1908. According to Villisca residents, Jones was extremely upset that Moore had left the company, while also taking the very lucrative John Deere franchise with him. William Mansfield, who also went by the names of George Worley and Jack Turnbow, was believed to have been hired by Frank Jones to carry out the murders. Payroll records, however, provided an alibi that placed Mansfield in Illinois at the time of the Villisca murders. Henry Moore, no relation to the Moore family, was convicted of killing his mother and grandmother in Columbia, Missouri just months after the Villisca Axe murders. He carried out the murder as a similar fashion to the Villisca Axe murders, brutally murdering them with an axe. 22 other axe murders had been committed in the Midwest during this period of time, and it has been suggested that Moore was a serial killer who was responsible for all these killings. Now, more than 100 years later, it is unlikely the identity of who committed these murders will be revealed. The Villisca Axe Murder House will remain a mystery, never to be solved. Today, the town of Villisca is home to less than 1,200 people. However, somewhat surprisingly, the Villisca Axe Murder House still stands and is often visited by tourists and ghost hunters. Those fascinated with the case regularly flock to see the house in person. While the Villisca Axe Murder House still stands, it is no longer lived in. The current owners, the Lynn family, keep the property as a time capsule and museum to remember the crimes that took place there. Although the house may be empty much of the time, the public can view the home with a tour guide. Visitors can even book an overnight stay. The Villisca Axe Murder House, with such a dark past, attracts many paranormal investigators and ghost hunters. Most forms of ghostly phenomenon have been reported there. These include objects moving, voices, apparitions, shadows, and bad vibes. The Villisca Axe Murder House has also featured on popular ghost hunting shows and podcasts including Ghost Adventures and Scariest Places on Earth.